Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is my son Noah and we are the Mental Cases.
Yes, we are.
And this is a show dedicated to the fandoms of various comics and science fiction and science fantasy and video games and all sorts of different things, and our experience of being fans as father and son and the generational differences and just the good times that we've had.
Right, and discussing it all, just
Yes.
having a fun time doing that.
And so this episode I think is a very special episode, and it's going to be controversial right off the bat. And it's
right.
No, it is. It's going to be controversial, and it's only our second episode, but I think it's important because we want to, in future videos, we want to go back to this video and reference things. So,
Yes.
So we have to get this idea out.
Right. This is kind of a very important video that we're making.
It is.
In terms of like what we're going to be doing later.
Yes, I think it's extremely important. And what it is, and so I'll start us off.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that Noah and I talk about a lot, very seriously.
Especially recently.
Yes,
and which we'll get to.
The past couple of weeks. But what I want to talk about is the rise of what I call nerdism and adherents of nerdism, which I call nerdists. So nerdists and nerdism.
Right.
So what is nerdism? So nerdism is basically I would say the warping and distorting of nerd identity and nerd culture into an ideology. And that ideology is an ideology that creates a power structure, okay, which is inherently oppressive and repressive, okay, of others. It creates an us-them situation. It creates a special group of people who have an authority and have an ability, or at least a perceived ability, to bully, to attack, to disparage, to shame others, to do whatever it takes in the name of this ideology, which they say is about some sort of grand ideas about either comics or movies or even
video games,
something philosophical, but it's really about an overcompensating for power. It's really about a power dynamic. It's using nerd culture and nerd identity to create a combined power dynamic over others.
Right.
Okay.
And as we've talked about this, why do we call them nerdists and everything? In my mind, the reason is because most of the people that adhere to nerdism,
yes,
very much come across like they're racist or sexist or homophobic. They're all the isms and all that stuff.
All the icks.
They really come across like
absolutely.
that.
There's a difference. A nerd, not all nerds are nerdists.
Right.
A nerdist is someone who takes their nerddom and uses it basically as a weapon.
Right, and
others.
Like a symbol of power.
Yes, as a symbol of power and an excuse to go outside of the bounds of appropriateness.
Right.
It becomes a free pass.
Right.
Because I'm a nerdist, I have a free pass to do and say awful, horrible things to people.
Right. I'm the expert, therefore I have authority over these people making the movies, or this actor,
or these other fans, or whatever.
These other fans.
And it gives a pass because it's collective. Nerdism is many people. It gives them a pass to justify or rationalize, even. Really, rationalize is a better word. To rationalize very terrible behavior.
Right.
Now, the first time I saw it was the first time I saw nerdism. I didn't know what it was. I had two experiences. The first time when I didn't know what it was actually a long time ago. It was 20 years ago. It was with the Phantom Menace.
Okay.
I didn't know that it was nerdism. Now that I look back on the reaction of the Phantom Menace, I realized I was experiencing the nerdists. Prior to that, nerdism didn't exist, or it existed in individuals. It didn't exist as a group. But what really shocked me about the reaction to the Phantom Menace was how angry some fans were, how the vitriol in the fans, which I had never experienced as a Star Wars fan. And I saw Star Wars, in the movie theater. I go way back,
right?
But, from the
before time,
right? And from the beginning, the time of legend. But
right.
But I had never experienced that level of anger amongst the fans. Now, that doesn't saying that I'm an apologist necessarily for the Phantom Menace. Yeah, I know nobody likes Jar Jar Binks. Nobody likes the kid.
Right,
you know, I mean, nobody likes
right.
you know,
Him building 3PO.
Right, there's things that people don't like, but I wasn't mad at the movie. I wasn't mad at George Lucas, and I wasn't mad at other people.
Right, you were just
for liking it or not liking it.
Right.
But there was a group of fans who were so filled with venom,
vitriol.
Yes, and I didn't like, what is this about? And I didn't get it. I thought maybe it was a generational thing because I was like 30 at the time, so I thought, okay, well maybe my attitudes. I didn't know what to think about it. But then the next thing that happened 10 years, well, more than 10 years, maybe about 15 years later, which really made me realize that there's something going on here, was the Gamergate thing.
Oh.
And really mostly the reaction to Anita Sarkeesian, I'm really talking about, as opposed to whatever the scandal was with the gamer programmer and the reporters, whatever that is. But that the reaction to Anita Sarkeesian was so over the top and hateful of her, just for pointing out these things. And I thought, what is going on here? And it was this, and what I really realized that it was, started thinking that it was an ideology and a power structure connected to a group identity, was that it was the same type of guy, same type of young white male with the same interests. Like there was all these commonalities.
And may I guess something? They were saying almost the exact same thing.
Oh yes, they were. They were saying exactly the same thing, and it was all very, it was way over the top with anger. And any moment and anything they could do to disparage or to take down Anita Sarkeesian. Mm-hmm. Now, look, now granted, I used to be an academic, so I understand postmodernism and feminist critique. So I got a lot of what she said. But hey, I also didn't agree with everything. I'd like to think that Mario rescues Peach because he loves her.
Right.
It's not an object. He's not trying to like collect a trophy. He genuinely, maybe that's just my childhood naivete, but I like to think that Mario is doing what he's doing out of love. But saying that, there was nothing that she said that offended me, or like I didn't think was interesting, or I couldn't sit and talk about. I watched all this stuff. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, same.
But there was this reaction that was so over the top and intense, and filled with hate and hate towards her, that I thought, that's why I started thinking about this, like, what is going on? So when did you first come face to face with nerdism?
Okay.
Like, wow, this is a thing.
Well, again, much like you, I didn't exactly realize it at first, but now looking back, it was very much that. I say what you will, but I used to be a brony.
You're post-brony.
I'm post-brony. I'm post-bronyism.
Yeah.
But I used to watch the show. I enjoyed the show. It was a cute, nice cartoon. And in 2013, they were leading up to the third season finale. And what had happened was it was leaked out, effectively, that in this, the main character of Twilight Sparkle was going to become a princess and get her wings and become this, hierarchy, alicorn thing.
Right.
When I first saw images of it, I was like, oh, it's just Twilight with wings. Oh, that's cute. That's cool. Of all the characters, she deserves it. But when I went to see what the fandom was talking about, tons of people were like flipping out, screaming that this was going to ruin the show, that she's become a Mary Sue, and we're having this whole fit about like this one thing. And I was just sitting there going, whoa, what the hell is going on? Why are you so angry about this? And then the episode comes out, and it's just kind of an average season finale, really. It's just a very musical, because that's what the show was. And by the end of it, she has her status, but she hasn't really done anything as a princess. None of the horrors that all of these guys that came up with had passed, and we had a fourth season to look on to, so all of this freaking out felt like it was for absolutely nothing. And all because of a status change to a character? It felt so overblown. And just coming from, at the time, for me, because I didn't realize, all the stuff, but for me, it was a weirdly weird place. Why are you so angry about this thing that's really nothing.
Right, that's kind of how I felt at the Phantom Menace. I didn't understand what was going on.
Right, Jar Jar Binks is awful, but the actor doesn't deserve, like, hate.
Yeah, I know, like, I think, so what makes nerdism, I think, toxic and bad is that it is a rationalization and a justification, an in-group justification of a lot of very bad behaviors and positions.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one is obviously, as we're talking about now, is sexism. Nerdism contains a certain level of sexism and objectification of women,
right?
And takes great offense at any criticism of that. So, in other words, this is sort of Well, I mean, one thing about nerdism is that it takes these rather deviant behaviors and perversions and inverts them. Like, no, these are all virtues, and these are good things, and you just don't understand anime.
Right.
You know,
age is just a number.
Yeah, that's right. Age is just a number. You know, there's all this inversion thing, and it's really, it's really things like sexism in disguise. So, for example, there's no, the only good female characters for the Nerdists are girls who are violent,
right?
Extremely violent. Sexy, and a teenage,
young,
very young. There's no room for any other type of woman in comics, in sci-fi, in video games. And now we may know this, but what the nerdism does is says that no, this is a good thing, and that any attempts to change that are really the oppressors.
Right. Right. Like,
it's this defense of sexism.
Right, it's very bizarre, and it's in almost every major Nerdist thing you can think of. Like, for example, like, not just the Brony thing that was way back in the
nerdism is everywhere. It's right. So it's Star Wars. I mean, they can't stand,
right, because that's what I'm going to bring up. Like, all this hate towards Rey, how did she
Rose,
right, or Rose,
even worse,
or Holdo. Like all of this, all of these women in these movies have some semblance of, like, empowerment, whether it be ideology or, like, an actual motive, action they're doing, and these guys are hitting them down, trying to just stomp down on this empowerment, even if it's small.
Right. It's an attempt to force out any kind of altering of that version of women that they have. Objectification of women. Any kind of different kind of view is met with not just resistance but attack. Like, for example, one of the things that I find, like going back to The Last Jedi, that I find ludicrous is that all the complaints about Leia and using the Force powers to get back into the ship. Like, that's the least egregious thing Rian Johnson does. Right, she's just force pulling, which has been established in, like, all the other movies.
Well, okay, and, like, their justification is awful, because, like, most of the reasoning I've heard for that is that, well, it makes her look like Mary Poppins.
No, it's because here's the truth. It's because it's a woman. Because if Darth Vader did it, they'd all be in a giant Nerdist circle jerk. Just like they were at the end of Rogue One.
Right, when Darth Vader's using his lightsaber.
Just like that. It was they would all, if it was Boba Fett and he used his jetpack, they'd all go, oh! They'd all love it.
Right.
So I can't take that seriously. But it's something, Noah, that's of the past, I'll say this, of the past 10, I say the Phantom Menace, but really the past 10 years. But it didn't exist at all in my childhood or teenage years. I didn't know any fans who were like this. Any group of fans were like this. Star Trek fans were like this. I didn't experience this with Trek fans. I didn't experience this with Star Wars fans. Star Wars fans were nicer people.
Right.
In the 80s.
There was nobody, back then going, how could Darth Vader do that to Luke?
Right.
In Empire or something.
I'm going to write James Earl Jones. I'm going to write him a nasty letter. Like, nobody, that didn't exist.
So here's my thought on that. What changed from my perspective is the advent of the internet and everything that's kind of come from that. That, like, the internet has allowed nerdism... Like, because here's what I'm thinking. I think nerdism technically existed in individuals back in, your time. But, like, what happened was now that the internet started to become more and more available and forums were created, YouTube and everything, as more of it got developed, it allowed nerdists to begin to come together and build and build and build as a community. That ideology of group thought, I think, was finally able to click into place once the internet had become more of a better advocate.
And you got a group of people who started validating each other's dysfunction.
Right, and what I like to call a CJV, a circle jerk vortex, where where it's Nerdist applauding and clapping for other Nerdists, and all of them just coming together and constantly appeasing one another.
Yeah,
validating everything they do and say, so they always feel like good. Their hunger for attention is being validated by other Nerdists.
Yes. And there's always this attempt to sort of link it to some sort of higher libertarianism, of freedom of speech, of freedom to say what I want, and I can hate Princess Leia if I want to. But that is all a smokescreen for some very darker things.
Right, for sexism.
For sexism, for racism, for homophobia, for transgender phobia.
Right, one of the first things that happened, I think, on the Force Awakens trailer was a good group of people being very racist towards John Boyega being in a Stormtrooper outfit and eventually holding a lightsaber. There was just this whole underbelly of, really awful stuff that they can't really defend, yet they try to.
Yeah, but I find that it's affecting lots of things now, because I find that it's ruining things. People ask me, as a lifelong Star Wars fan, what did I not like about The Last Jedi? And that's always what I didn't like.
Right.
But you know what my answer is? No, I didn't like. I didn't like the fans. I'm okay with The Last Jedi. My real problem is that there's a group of people who are trying to ruin it for everybody in order to have some semblance of feeling of power, of an overcompensating to feel empowered.
They've ruined their own ego, effectively.
And honestly, hide their own feelings of inferiority and shame about being nerds or whatever it is.
Right, and it's so bizarre.
So I don't want to talk about The Last Jedi, not because I don't have things to say, but there's a certain level of the Star Wars fandom that has become so horrible. And that's really weird for me, because Star Wars fans in the 80s, I'm the first generation.
Right. You were literally a kid.
7, 8 years old when it came out. So I was first generation Star Wars fans. Star Wars fans in the late 70s, 80s were like Harry Potter fans.
Oh, right. It was all
kids,
I want to be in the
magical,
universe,
and I want to have the Force, and let's have lightsabers.
Let's watch the Christmas special.
Yeah, I saw the Christmas special. There wasn't any, there was. Maybe it was because it was the mind of a child, so there was a naivete there. But there was none of this vitriol and hate and hatred of women and hatred of people different and shaming others.
Oh, I'm sure
because they had a different idea about whether Darth Vader was Luke's father or not or whatever. There was that didn't exist. That was alien to me, and it certainly never existed in Trek. Trek was all very utopian. In terms of the fan, it was very open and accepting of others.
Right.
So I didn't. This wasn't always a part of fandom. This kind of really nastiness.
Right. And what's weird about it, especially in this particular decade, is that it's this decade where I feel like it's blown up to its biggest.
Yes, it's stronger than ever. I'm stunned at the size of it.
Right. And my theory to that is, and I know how people might feel about this, but honestly, I think the tipping point was Trump's election.
Yes, I think I agree. The Trump revolution has brought out all of the ugliness of white male culture in all its variation forms.
Right.
Like
racist,
white supremacists,
right.
Sexism, and now we have nerdism.
Right.
As a part of that it's okay to be a bully, it's okay to fight against people who are just trying to find an identity.
Because apparently you can become president. Your awfulness and vitriol has basically been shown to everyone to just allow you to still gain a higher status.
Right, there's no consequences.
Right, there's no consequences. So I think that really validated them. And what I think really shows this is The Force Awakens versus The Last Jedi. That there was criticism for The Force Awakens, but it paid no mind. Nothing happened on Rotten Tomatoes. Nothing. Fans were fine with it. Everybody came out of it loving it. But then The Last Jedi comes out in 2017. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 50% or something, for the users. And so it's almost in like the media where all the
Yeah,
hate is coming from.
there's a direct attempt at exerting force
Right. That
to enforce the ideology.
right
on
now that
others.
they've been vindicated,
Right.
they feel it's time to push and use their force to
Right.
get across their message.
And so we all have to live under nerdism. We're all
Right,
forced to
right,
live under,
right. Now-
under this very rigid view about people, about women, about social relations, about sex, about economics, whatever it is.
Right.
That's sort of encapsulated in nerdism as it is used as a frame of critique for comics, video games, whatever.
So here's my question. When dealing with a nerdist or dealing with nerdism, what is the best way to like approach it?
Well, I'm old school, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way you deal with a bully is you confront the bully. You don't back down from the bully, and you don't put up with this nonsense, especially when it comes to things like sexism. If sexism is going to disappear, it's up to men to say stop. There is something immoral in sexism. There's something immoral in racism. There's something immoral in homophobia.
There's something immoral in nerdism.
In nerdism, therefore, there's something immoral in nerdism, even if we're just talking about comics or movies or The Legend of Zelda or whatever. You know what I mean? There's something. I mean, that's something that Nita Sarkeesian was trying to point out.
Right.
In all her videos, she was trying to make that point. It's up to people to stand up to it.
Right.
Because it's beginning to bend things. It's beginning to make things unenjoyable.
Right. Like, for example, this is out before the not before, after the trailer for episode 9, and it very much comes across like Star Wars is bending to all the raging fans. Like
the raging Nerdist fans.
The raging Nerdist fans. Like, hey, we've got a character you really like back. We're gonna do this cool, awesome stunt, and Lando Calrissian's here. Like, it comes across so much more as a reaction to the Nerdist hate of The Last Jedi.
And the mistake that they're making is that the Nerdists don't care about. They talk like they care about aesthetics and quality, but what they really care about is power. And they're never going to be happy, and they're going to dump on whatever Disney puts out so that they can feel superior and force everybody under this ideology, this power structure.
That's exactly what I've been thinking. Like, yeah, okay, fine, we got Palpatine and Lando back. It's like, but I bet we're still going to dog Rey. If Rose is here, God forbid, any reference to Captain Holdo, good lord. Like, I'm going into that movie also thinking that. Like, that's also a key aspect.
It ruins it. Same thing. Endgame is next week, and the same thing with Endgame. Like, I hope that Brie Larson is okay, and that she doesn't. Like, now I'm going and worrying that there's going to be a scene that's going to cause the Nerdists to like ruin this movie for everybody.
Right.
So like I can't even go to Endgame and just sit there and watch it because there's this group of
people who just
self-appointed. Nerd Nazis.
They just ingrain themselves in your mind.
Right. Well, that's what they want to do. They want to bend. They want it to bend. So what you have to do is you have to resist it. And it's not. And again, it's because people might be watching this and thinking, well, it's just Endgame. It's just video games. Yeah, but not. But again, as Anita Sarkeesian was trying to point out, it's not.
It's more than that.
It's more than that. It's fighting against sexism. It's fighting against a version of oppression. It's fighting against misogyny.
Right.
It's fighting against a version of racism.
And I'm glad you say that because that's something I've been thinking of. This conversation is so prevalent because, yes, will Captain Marvel and Endgame eventually be non-relevant by, I don't know, like the time we see Spider-Man? Sure. But this talk about how, like, all of these Nerdist guys hating empowered female characters happened in 2013 with the Bronies. It happened in 2015 with Star Wars. It happened in 2017 with The Last Jedi. And it happened again with Captain Marvel. Like, this sexist, racist, Nerdist view is always prevalent.
Yeah, and each time it's getting worse.
Oh,
like, it's stronger than the last. So, there's something going on within this community, within the fandom community in general, that has to be addressed because it's basically pushing out a whole other group of people.
And it's just ruining it for the normal fans.
Well, it's ruining it for anybody who just wants to join it, first of all. But there's just something sort of morally questionable in it. Mm-hmm. As well as just dysfunctional. I mean, just something inherently dysfunctional in having that level of hate towards towards women, towards homosexuals, whatever,
African American,
or any kind of or putting any restraint on your behavior. I mean, it's like dealing with children. They don't want any restraint. Right. They don't want to have, they hide behind freedom of speech all the time.
A key thing to note about them is that they want attention, but they don't want feedback.
No, they don't want any feedback.
They want to say
zero.
They want to say something really awful that they believe in, but they don't want you to question it. They want you to accept it, and they'll hammer it down in your head to accept it.
And part of Nerdism, too, is also playing the victim. This gaslighting that goes on, where, we're under attack because I posted a video.
Right, from the SJWs.
Right, I'm under the, this sort of this reverse victimization that goes on.
Right.
Everything's this inversion. It's it's kind of fascinating when you're not a part of it. Everything is sort of, that existed is taken and flipped upside down. Nerds are now the bullies. I was thinking this,
Right. You come from a time where, nerds are the victims and
jocks
are the
nerds
bullies.
Were absolutely, yes. Now I realize the role that jocks played was
apparently key to keeping something really worse down.
I know. Who knew that jocks were the heroes?
Right, who knew?
But it's the funny thing is that it's the utopian nerd future that was portrayed in Revenge of the Nerds is completely wrong. So Revenge of the Nerds was a big popular movie in the 80s, and that might have been sort of a zeitgeist of part of the switchover, into nerd culture being main culture. But the in Revenge of the Nerds, though, the nerds have this very open, inclusive Greek, house, they're on college campus.
Right.
Where they have, blacks and gays and anybody, it's very inclusive.
Right.
The nerds are very, into following the rules of conduct. They're excellent lovers and of women and all that. And none of that's true.
Right.
The reality is,
or if that was at one point true, it's completely inverted.
It passed. Yeah, it went past, and now it's extremely exclusive. It hates everybody. It's taken its perversions and its distortions of women and elevated it
to
into
this
some kind
degree.
Of right. It's some kind of virtue.
Right. It's bananas.
It is bananas, and granted, you're right. Individuals like this always existed, but I never encountered whole communities. Because look, I went to Trek conventions. I went to Trek conventions when I was your age and younger, and I never and this is when in the height of the Next Generation. So there were big, thousands and thousands of people at these things just for Trek, and I never encountered anything like this amongst Trek fans. Nothing like this. Maybe there'd be one weirdo guy, but really, as a whole, I didn't encounter this kind of hate, this need to enforce a viewpoint that was inherently oppressive on other social issues on people. I didn't encounter that.
So do you think that Nerdists or nerds that became Nerdists became that way due to the bullying they received? Do you think this had festered in nerds back in your time, and that now that the internet had given them the ability to shield themselves, now they've let it out? Do you think part of your generation has culminated it?
In other words, did the social situation change due to the technology that allowed? Is that what you're asking?
I guess so.
I would say yes, because it gave the rise of nerdism. It came from like-minded people validating each other. And
despite being wrong.
Okay. Despite being morally wrong.
Right.
But being able to validate it and then gain power in that. And also, again, the anonymity and protection of the internet. A jock isn't going to get on a plane and fly 3 time zones to find you on Facebook and beat you up.
Right.
They don't have the attention span for that.
Right.
It's not happening.
Right.
So you could be free to be a jerk.
A jock.
A jerk jock.
A jerk jock.
Yes.
Right.
I think, though, it has to be spoken out against. It has to be identified, and I think that's what I'm trying to do with this video. And
right. I think,
is identify it. Nerdism.
Right.
Okay.
And Nerdists.
So let's define it again. So nerdism, because this is a half-hour video.
I know.
Nerdism is the elevation, or not even elevation, because that's not the right word. The distortion. The distortion of nerd identity and nerd culture into an ideology that creates an oppressive power dynamic.
Right. And
to which the Nerdists sit at the top of. And because they're Nerdists, and because they've identified, they have this ideology, they feel they have a pass for any kind of horrible behavior.
Right, including sexism,
racism, misogynism, homophobia.
Right. It's awful people being able to just freely say whatever the hell they want with no repercussions.
Yes.
And they want to keep it that way.
Yes, and I think, and the reason why I wanted us to make this video, and I'm glad that we are, is because I think the only way to stop it is to point it out, put the light on it, shine the light on it, and say, lift up the rock, look at the worm, shine the light, and fight it, and to fight it, and not back down.
We got to be the Nerdist cops, the nerd cops. We got to be nerd cops, effectively.
I guess.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for this video. We hope to talk about nerdism and more in the future. We have a lot more to say about it, for sure. Check us out on Twitter, and check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook page.
And we have a Patreon. Please support us there.
Yep, and like and subscribe.
All right. Thank you.